All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. It's Thursday, and still don't have a final deal yet. But if we do, one of the questions I'm asking today is how much credit, if any, and I put credit actually in quotation marks. You can see in that image I put together, how much credit do Harris Biden deserve? And I include Harris in that Harris Biden because she said during the campaign that she was in the room when a lot of the decisions were made about funding Israel, about supplying Israel with weapons of mass destruction. She was right there. She agreed with all of them, and she wouldn't do anything differently. So if there is indeed a ceasefire, right now, both presidents are claiming credit. Their campaigns are saying we deserve it. How much does Harris Biden really deserve, if any? And if you're going to give them credit, then don't we have to assign an awful lot of blame to them for all the devastation that's happened in the past 15 months, 16 months since Israel's latest Nakba began. All right, 240-242-5646 if you want to join me, 240-242-5646. The killing by Israel continues in Gaza, but before we get there, and again, that's been what I center, right? It's the tragedy, the horror, the murders, the genocide, the massacre, whatever word or words you think are most appropriate. That's what I center on Halitics. And I've noticed, by the way, I don't get a lot of viewers. I don't get a lot of hits. But when I talk about Gaza, I get even fewer. People really, for whatever reason, don't want to hear about this. And I guess it's just too depressing, or they don't want to hear me blame the United States because we're so complicit. But hey, this is the most important information out there, and I, for good or evil, am able to discuss what I want to discuss. I do this, I wouldn't call it a labor of love. I feel like it's a labor of necessity. It's something I have to do. But I can talk about what I want without too much concern about whether it negatively impacts on my audience growth or audience size. Maybe that's privilege, whatever word you want to use. I don't think there's anything more important than this. So here is is it NBC? It says 4 News. I don't know if that's NBC. I don't think it is, but it's a pretty good report, about 4+ minutes that I'll play with various interruptions. So let's go.
After more than a year of unimaginable pain, celebrations on Gaza's streets as news of the ceasefire filtered through tonight.
All right, so you can see, so happy because there was an agreement reached in principle. It's not done. Israel, Knesset still has to vote on this. And even if they do agree with the terms, the ceasefire officially won't go into effect until Sunday. So there's going to be more killing by Israel, even if this ultimately goes forward as hope. But it's so awful there. The pain, the suffering has been so intense, so acute for so long that any legitimate hope is vastly celebrated. And you have to, again, I believe, fairly, legitimately condemn in the strongest possible terms the complicity of Harris Biden in this crime against humanity that the Israelis have committed and are committing with the full, unwavering support of the U.S. government, the U.S. administration. By the way, I should have figured this out. It is British 4, right? Because they have their Channel 4. So that's what this is from, England.
Young lives overshadowed by this war. Now, finally, a chance of a more peaceful future.
والله احنا فرحانين كثير انه الهم والحزن والقصف والموت.
So happy it's over, he says, and tragically it's not yet over. And even if the ceasefire takes hold, it may, end abruptly, as Israel has made clear through its actions that it does not abide by international agreements, it does not comply with international law, and it does not respect human life.
خلص بطل صار وقف وإنه حنرجع بلادنا وحنرجع لأهلنا.
We'll return to our families, and there you can see those women hugging shrouded bodies, those who are victims of the American-Israeli genocide.
In what could prove to be the final hours of Israel's deadly war in Gaza. These, the victims of a strike in Deir al-Balah that killed 11 people, including 4 children from one family. Any ceasefire too late for them, and more than 46,000 others here.
يعني احنا من اسبوعين واحنا بنتبع الاخبار انه تهدئه ومش تهدئه والكلام اللي بنسمعه. اللي على ارض الواقع يا جماعه غير تماما. اللي على ارض الواقع كل يوم مزيد من
reality on the ground is that every day brings more killings and destruction.
المزيد من التدمير، مربعات سكنيه باكملها بتمحى، احياء باكملها بتمحى.
Peace in Gaza would mean peace in a wasteland. 2/3 of all buildings in the territory destroyed or damaged by Israeli strikes. With practically the entire population displaced and hunger widespread, everyone has been hoping for an end to the fighting.
How can anyone question or doubt that this is genocide? How can anyone argue that the Israeli leaders are not guilty of the ultimate crime?
الناس في انتظار كل لحظة إنه الهدنة تبدأ، لأنه للأمانة إحنا مش عايشين، إحنا عايشين بحكم الموتى، هذه مش حياة. كل دقيقة بتمر علينا كأنها سنة، الناس بتموت كل لحظة.
We live like dead people. Every moment feels like a year.
In Israel's hostage square, focal point for the families of the more than 90 Israeli hostages still held captive by Hamas. Tonight, there was cautious optimism.
We are just waiting for them to come home. We're excited, obviously, but until they're not here, we don't want to get too excited.
There's also still fear. On multiple occasions, a deal has seemed imminent, only to fall through. 33 hostages would be released in a first 6-week phase in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian detainees. Will the two sides be able to agree on continuing the deal beyond that?
We know that there can be many accidents on the way and many issues that can postpone it or delay it, so we are not there yet.
Amidst the misery and squalor that has become Gaza, families dream of their old lives. Amal, suffering from cancer, forced to flee Gaza City, is already imagining what it would be like to return to whatever is left of her home.
أنا يمكن لما يفتحوا الحاجز يقولوا يلا ارجعوا يمكن مع الفرحة ما بعرف يمكن أمشي حافية.
So she's saying maybe she can go back. That woman, I believe, has cancer based on what the reporter was saying, and she's saying she would be so joyful, so happy to be able to return to her home.
من كتر الفرحة يمكن آخذ حفيد من أحفادي، يعني يمكن محمد قديش صغير بالعمر، عمره أيام، يمكن هيك أحضنه وأركض فيه.
To carry her grandchildren.
يعني أولادي هيك ماشيين وراي، هالعالم كلها تركض.
Little Muhammad is just 1 day old, just a few days old, so she'd carry him. It is so painful to me, I guess is the best word to use, that there are so many people who are intelligent, who I respect, for whom the suffering, that's unimaginable pain, rolls off their back. They don't care, or they will immediately respond, well, what about what happened to Israel? What about the victims on October 7th? As though there's some kind of a quid pro quo. Well, because of what happened on October 7th, because we're the Jewish people, or we support them, they're our allies, we get to create an unimaginable hellscape for millions of people. That's the lesson that many have taken from this. And it really does kind of lead you to believe there's no human hope for the human, for the species or for the planet.
أحس خطواتي إنها عم تركض أنا كأني راكبة طيارة وصولي لغزة.
Two peoples divided by so much, united for now in cautious hope.
Well, the outlines of this deal are really pretty much the same as the outlines of the deal that we've been talking about for much of the past year after it was outlined by President Biden last May. Since then, thousands more Palestinians as well as multiple Israeli hostages have been killed. It's hard to escape the conclusion that a key driving factor behind the success of the talks at this stage now is the upcoming inauguration of President Trump. He had threatened that all hell would be unleashed if the hostages are not released. But perhaps it's his impact on the Israeli government that is more significant. Netanyahu, it seems like...
I'm going to just stop it there again. So the reporter, this is Channel 4, liberal media in the UK, or liberal as we would see it, left media in the UK, and acknowledging the pressure on Israel by Trump, right? Not the threats against the Palestinians, which horrified me. That's not what caused the deal to happen, because as the reporter tells you, the same conditions were agreed to 8 months ago by Hamas, and Israel has repeatedly pulled the rug out from discussions, has repeatedly said, no, we're not going to agree, no matter how much Antony Blinken, a war profiteer, claims that it's Hamas that was the stumbling block. It has always been Israel, and everyone knows it. No one doubts it. And this reporter even makes that more abundantly clear by saying what really drove this is the pressure that Trump exerted on Netanyahu, on Israel. That's why it looks like, and it isn't definite yet, and I so pray it happens. I don't really pray because I don't believe, but I so hope it happens because, there's a real fear that if this doesn't happen over the weekend, Trump takes power, his hardliners, the Elise Stefanik's, the Huckabees, the Rubios, all of whom are ardent, aggressively violent Zionists, will basically just green light more Israeli atrocities.
If the hostages are not released, but perhaps it's his impact on the Israeli government that is more significant. Netanyahu, it seems, likely thought that whilst Biden was in power, that perhaps Trump would be more supportive of his war effort, but Trump making clear that he wanted an end to the war before he took office. We'll have to wait and see if that's what this ceasefire agreement evolves into. We'll also...
All right, so, this is what we've been saying. It seems very, very clear that it took Trump getting involved through his negotiator Witkoff to finally bring Netanyahu around. Now, I'm not going to give Trump a lot of credit, but what I'm going to do is say this is clear evidence of the massive failings of Harris Biden. That Trump can come in, and Trump has some peace cred. He does. He legitimately does. But it took him to come in because what could have been accomplished a year ago or more, with tens of thousands of people still alive, with Gaza not razed to the ground, it could have happened. But it didn't because of the Harris Biden failure, criminal failure. it's not over yet. The killing hasn't stopped. Israel is still murdering innocents. 71. This Reuters headline says 70. The actual text after the ceasefire accord, Israel still killing 71. In that article, it says 70 in the headline, but I'm going to go with 71, which I didn't clip out. I guess I should have. And there's your caption, Israel and the Biden-Harris. He's still Biden-Harris. It's not Trump. Yeah, we'll change that to Trump once it's Trump. But 46,778 if you go with that 71 number from yesterday. 71 killed yesterday. And listen, if you watch my if you're watching now, give me a call, 240-242-5646. I really want to hear from those of you, maybe there aren't that many, but if you're watching, and this is live now, why you turn off when I talk about Israel, Gaza, why this is something that just isn't of interest, at least not sufficient interest for you to stick with me. Because honestly, I actually do watch other hosts when they talk about Gaza, Israel. I always tuned in closely with Brianna Joy Gray when she was on The Hill Rising, and she talked about this issue all the time, as much as she possibly could. I always would look at it, Katie Halper, others, the heroes of the resistance against Israel. And so I'm curious if it's something I'm doing or if it's just you don't want to hear about it. A lot of dispute, right? People are arguing over who should get credit for this. And again, I think if anyone deserves blame, besides obviously the Israeli government, it's Harris Biden. But I read something that I thought was very interesting. I don't have the clip here, but that what Trump did with his negotiator there, Witkoff, were really pressuring Bibi, saying, no, we're not going to give you everything you want. Yes, I want this deal now. That actually gave Netanyahu a little bit of cover where he could go to the Knesset, he could go to the media and say, yeah, Trump's pushing me to do this. Trump's doing it. It's not like he could go to the Israeli hardliners, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and say, I would love to let you keep killing Gazans. That nothing would please me more than an ever-growing death count in Gaza. But Trump is stopping me before I kill again, right? So there's a legitimate point here that this is actually what Bibi wanted. And for all of you who said, well, AIPAC is behind what Harris Biden are doing, and she can't say no. She can't say that she would do something different. She has to be loyal to her president when she took over as the candidate, and all of that nonsense. This may well be even what Netanyahu wanted. We know large segments, I don't know if it's a majority, but large segments of the Israeli population, not that they care about Gaza, not that they care about Palestine, they don't, but they do want an end to the killing. They do want the hostages home. So really what Trump apparently is doing, and you heard it from that reporter, the pressure that he put on Bibi may be exactly what Israel wanted as well. I can't give any credit. Now, I know Biden's taking a victory lap. Obviously, this would have happened months and months ago, probably over a year ago, if the Harris-Biden administration had just said to Netanyahu, no more arms. We're not giving you another bomb. We're not giving you another bullet. We're not giving you another missile because you're using them to kill innocent civilians. So that's done. That's over. And obviously the Intercept sees it the exact same way. Israel agrees to the ceasefire it rejected months ago. Thousands more died. And it's because Biden-Harris didn't put pressure on Israel, because Biden-Harris kept giving Israel what it wanted, kept giving them their fix. of weapons, of money, of support. Despicable. I heard the guys on Due Dissidents talk about this, and one of the, I love the Palestinian flags, Ari. Thanks for sharing those in the chat. One of the points that Keaton made is that he is now at a point where he thinks Biden could be the worst president, certainly of his lifetime, and one of the worst of all time. That he's willing to say he's not there yet, Keaton said, but he could possibly be persuaded to the belief that Biden is worse than W. Now that's pretty strong stuff, right? Biden worse than the guy who gave us Abu Ghraib. Biden worse than the guy that lied us into the war on the people of Iraq that led to over 1 million dead just in that country. Biden worse than the guy who turned the Middle East into a power vacuum that put Al-Qaeda in charge of huge swaths of that region. And Weiss is saying, look, Biden gave us green-lighted genocide. And if that's not bad enough, and it certainly is, throw on the pile this incredibly destructive, incredibly expensive war in Ukraine that has turned that country largely into a failed state, that is turning Eastern Europe into a vacuum. So when you combine those two extraordinarily horrific policies, can you make the argument that Biden is even worse than W? And I think you can. I'm not saying I buy it, but I'm not saying it's wrong. Biden is so bad, Harris, Biden are so bad that we cannot state with any degree of confidence that Trump will be worse. None. And Trump's policies are really bad in so many areas, right? Especially when it comes to immigration, civil rights, freedom of speech. He wants to lock up, deport people if they criticize the government, if they criticize our pro-Israel policy. And yet, as bad as Donald Trump was, guy who refused to accept that he lost a race, tried to stay in power, used, the power he still had to try to illegally remain in office against the will of the people. That's how bad Donald Trump is. And he is that bad. And yet it's very plausible, it's very fair to say Joe Biden's even worse. I made the point to a progressive Democrat, isn't it now time that we just once and for all give up on the argument that the Democrats are the lesser evil? We can't make that argument. I never liked it much anyway. I don't think, for me, there are red lines. You're this bad, I won't vote for you. You're consistently bad on every issue, I won't vote for you. But if we get to a point where we can't even distinguish the Democratic Party as arguably less evil, then there's nothing to stop us from moving to a third or emerging party, right? Because the only legitimate claim in support of a Harris-Biden second term, the only argument that really made any sense is Trump would be worse. But if Trump isn't any worse, then there's no cost. The argument against voting for Jill Stein was there's a cost. There's a real cost involved, because if we vote for Stein and the impact of that vote, the impact of supporting Stein is that Trump beats Harris, Harris loses, then we're worse off than we would, or even worse off than we would have been if Harris had won. But given that it's far from clear that that's true, right? It's far from clear that Trump will be worse than Harris would have been. In fact, the evidence now is maybe he won't be worse. Maybe he will broker peace. Not saying it will happen. We don't have it yet. But it looks like at least he's made more progress than Biden and Harris made in 15, 16 months. If you can't make a cogent, convincing, or at least persuasive argument that the Dems aren't as bad as the Republicans, then you have no argument against voting third party, against building an emerging party to take on the Republicans. None. And that's where we are right now. I don't think it's even arguable. 240-242-5646. Don't forget, let me see if I can get my, I like to get everything up, all my little ducks in a row. Don't forget, click like. There's your little like button. Maybe I should do blue and white. Too much blue and white. Is that true? I don't know. And then also, if you haven't yet done so, I implore you, please do subscribe. It just, obviously makes a huge difference for me. More subscriptions, more likes, and we do see the total number of videos that are distributed, that are beat the algorithm, and that get a critical mass of hits. One of the issues that really animated some parts of the left in the last election, that got many, I think, persuaded many that you had to vote for Harris, as bad as she might have been, was this issue of transgender rights. And I have always been somewhat less enthusiastic about some aspects of the transgender movement than many of you. And I remember getting into an argument about this, so maybe a discussion is better, about the question of transgender females in girls and women's sports. And that's where I'm going to focus on this in this segment. I want to say I'm very disappointed that the person that I had this conversation with has completely ghosted me, will not respond to my texts, will not answer my phone calls. And I want to be very clear, I'm not referring to Dana Beyer. That is not who I'm talking about, Dr. Beyer. She is a trans woman who was on my program. I thought it was an excellent show. Maybe it was well over a year ago. And we talked about Palestine and Israel. We disagreed vehemently on that. We actually agreed pretty much on trans issues, where she had real concerns, by the way, with respect to hormone treatments and surgical interventions for minors, which many others in the conservative movement also oppose. And she had her concerns, even though she ultimately did transition medically from being male or being a man to being a woman. So, I am very mixed on the idea that minors should be afforded hormone treatments or surgical interventions. Certainly, I support all psychological support and any kind of mental health treatment, emotional treatment. Not saying that there's a mental health component, mental illness, but obviously it's tough if you're trans. I mean, our society is, you're a minority, very significant minority, and people look askance. They still do. There's definitely bias against trans people. So, I certainly support for trans youth, but do I support, and I support gender affirming care to the extent it's psychological. Do I support hormone treatments? Do I support surgical intervention? I'm very, very skeptical of those. And where I'm even more skeptical is of the idea that transgender girls, and I say girls because I'm talking here high school sports, just as the CBS News report from yesterday reports the House ban on transgender students in girls' sports. So it's all Republican support. I think every Republican voted yes, and virtually every Democrat voted against it. I think the Republicans have the better argument here, and I want to go through this a little bit. Not going to take a ton of time with it, but at least a few minutes. So this is not law. This has to go through the Senate. It's unclear if the Senate will take it up. I don't know where Mitch McConnell stands on this. But I honestly don't really get the controversy. I really and truly don't understand why this is a big deal and why there are a lot of people who are really upset about it. I would love to have had on that individual that I'm referring to have a discussion about this. And let's go through it. So the bill, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, would amend Title IX to recognize a person's sex as based solely on a person's reproductive biology and genetics at birth. In other words, trans girls aren't covered by Title IX. They aren't in a position where they can say, okay, I get to compete on a girls' team. There have to be spots for me as a girl to compete for. They're saying no. In fact, they're not considered girls for the purposes of Title IX, and therefore schools can't allow them to participate on girls' teams because they would be taking the space of a girl. And they determine whether you're a girl, according to this report from CBS, based on your reproductive biology and genetics at birth. Now, I have made the point that I don't think it should be genetics at birth. I think it should be at conception, because it's at conception that the sex of the human to come, not a human yet, but the baby, and ultimately the adult, is determined. Is it two X's or is it an XY? If it's an XX, it's a female. If it's an XY, it's a male. But there are some, a few exceptions. You can have XXY, and I think there's even XYY. If there's a Y, as I understand it, doctors say that's a male. You're a male if you have a Y chromosome, period, end of story. And therefore, if you have a, but not every child, not every infant is born who has a Y chromosome. Not every infant is born with a penis or with a visible penis. Some I believe XXY, the gonads, the penis are internal, and they appear to be a girl. They have what looks to be a vagina, but they don't have a uterus. They're not going to ever be able to become pregnant. They're not going to have a period. So that's a male, even though at birth they're determined at birth to be a female. An example of somebody who might meet that definition is the Olympian boxer Amani Khalif, who according to reports, was fits that definition, right? Was born with a vagina, appears to be a female, was raised a female, not a trans. At no point did they transition from one sex to another or from one gender to another, but in the end, they may be, according to at least one boxing federation, have been determined to have the Y chromosome. Now, I think in that case, Amani Khalif, assuming that's true, and I think there was enough evidence to support the suspicion that Amani Khalif is biologically male. If that is the case, and you run the test, whatever, I don't believe then they should have been competing against women in the U.S. in the Olympics. I think there's just it's dangerous. It's harmful to the women competing. It's unfair because men are just simply stronger on average by a significant margin. And it doesn't mean every trans or every male will beat every female, and certainly most men would lose. I would get my head handed to me, even if I was 22 years old when I was in the best shape of my life. I would stand a chance in a fighting competition with an Olympic woman athlete. I would be killed. I wouldn't stand a chance. But at the end of the bell curve, at the far right, the best, strongest, quickest athletes are men, are biological males. That said, I have no problem with this rule. Now, I think for professional sports, for the Olympics, for that level, go with the actual chromosomal test. But when it comes to competing in a girls' sports in high school and junior high, I don't think you need to go to that level of granularity. Yeah, go with the sex at birth. It's obvious. It doesn't require any kind of additional testing. You just have a birth certificate. Look at the birth certificate. What does the birth certificate say? That's it. Seems to make all the sense in the world. I honestly don't understand why this is even controversial. Now, one of the arguments the Democrats made against this plan, or against this bill, is they claim that it would open the door to intrusive genital examinations of girls. That, unless the CBS story is false, unless and the media gets things wrong, it's true. Unless that is an incorrect description of the bill, the Democratic opposition is ridiculous. It's absurd. The Republican bill, which says the sex at birth determines your eligibility, that bill will obviate the need for any kind of additional examinations, because all you have to do is provide your birth certificate. So if you have a girl who is, and we're going to even talk about one in a moment, who does appear to be more masculine, to have, a more defined musculature, or just bigger, heavier boned, but they are a girl, they are a female. That's the end. Here's my birth certificate. And everyone will accept that. But if you don't go by birth certificate, if instead you say, well, it's what you identify with, and then you go into all these questions. Have they been taking some kind of, if they're a biological male, have they been taking hormone therapy? Have they been taking estrogen supplements? Have they taken enough? Let's do an examination. Let's find out. So it's actually the allowance of trans athletes to compete, trans females, trans girls, I should say, trans girls to compete against girls. That's what opens the door to the intrusive genital examinations. This bill actually protects athletes, female girl athletes, from being subject to any intrusive examinations. One Democratic lawmaker, Suzanne Bonamici, says, we're already seeing examples of harassment and questioning of girls who may not conform to stereotypical feminine roles. Yeah, well, that's always been the case, right? I mean, that's what people do. We harass people who are different. That's a human trait. As a matter of fact, it's gotten much better. Much, much better. I talked to my kids, when they were in high school, there were some trans kids and they were like accepted. That wouldn't have been the case when I was in high school. Though, I think we would have been like, okay, they're trans, but it would have been, people would have been like, that's really weird. But that wasn't the case for my kids. They were like, no, they're fine. Everyone, they're accepted, whatever. It's all good. Hakuna Matata. That's now. So for Bonamici to be saying, oh, well, people are harassing these kids. Yeah, under the current law, because they don't want their daughters or their friends, they don't want themselves to be competing, if they're athletes, against a biological male who will have advantages. But that's all gone. There's no more worry about that if you just go by the birth certificate. So obviously this plan by the Republican bill does make sense, and there's no good reason to oppose it. I want to give an example of why, a real world example. So I saw this article. This is in today's Monterey Herald, and there's an outstanding woman athlete. I think she's now, I guess she's going to college this fall coming up. And her name is Ella. She's an incredible athlete. She's a girl wrestler and even better at softball. And here's a picture of her wrestling. And so she's in the green. And she's very, very strong. She's very, very lithe. She's very, very, she's better than the other girls. It's just that simple. At wrestling, at softball. She's just better. She was voted the High School Athlete of the Year by the Monterey Herald last year. She's a girl. As far, I have to admit, I had some suspicion. Is she trans? She didn't look to me like you don't see defined musculature. Her face is softer. But still, she's big and, looks more somewhat mannish than maybe some girls do, or than in fact girls do. Many girls do, not all, obviously. She is a girl. She's able to succeed in high school athletics because she's competing against other girls. If she were competing against bio males, she would almost certainly have less success. That wouldn't be fair to her. That wouldn't be right. And I'll tell you something else. She's, she's not your traditional, right? Who is Bonamici talking about? Traditional female roles or don't conform to stereotypes. She doesn't. For, like the cute little cheerleader. That's not Ella Myers. But she's able to be incredibly successful in athletics, have great self-esteem because she wins. She brings a lot of honor to her school. She's a hero there. Because she's able to succeed in athletics competing against other girls. Title IX allows those girls who don't appear to conform to traditional feminine stereotypes to have success. And that's a wonderful thing. That's a great, great thing. She does compete against boys in practice. This is the best female wrestler apparently in Monterey County. This is the best softball player in Monterey County. And she's big and strong for a girl, for sure, 140 pounds. She competes against boys. And what does she say? I am getting my butt whipped in practice. She would not enjoy the success she enjoys. Now, I'm not saying there are a whole bunch of trans girls in Monterey County who would compete against her and beat her, but in the end, biological males who have had puberty, even if they haven't, there are going to be some who are simply physically stronger, quicker than, and as she says, more violent. So the bill by the Republicans protects Ella Myers. Now, I understand there's going to be an argument. Well, what about trans girls? Shouldn't they be allowed to compete? Don't they deserve a place to compete? And I would say they do. And I don't have a great answer to that. And maybe you have an open category, or you say, okay, you can still compete against boys, or you say to a trans girl, if you want to compete in high school sports, then you will then delay transitioning. You have power. If you want to transition, you want to become physiologically female. Well, first of all, we question whether that type of intervention, medical intervention, is indicated for minors. But if you want to compete if you want to vie for varsity soccer, you want to be a high school wrestler, then go ahead, compete, try out for the boys' team. And if you want to transition, you'll have to wait, because the transitioning will in fact result in you losing muscle tone, losing some of your strength, your quickness. You'll probably lose some of that. So you still can compete, but you'll have to make a choice between transitioning now or transitioning later. And I think that's a fair answer. I think that's a legitimate response. 240-242-5646. 240-242-5646. So Shade says the accuracy of gender designations on original birth certificates can be problematic. And I agree, that could be. Nothing's perfect. There's no absolute perfect solution. And I think that if there is a mistake on a birth certificate, you can go and petition to have it changed. So I would say that shouldn't be the be-all and end-all. As I said, there are some. Generally, it goes, though, with the XXYs being considered to be female girls, designated girls, even though chromosomally they're males. And I would be okay with that. If your birth certificate says you're a girl because you're born with a vagina, or what appears to be a vagina, but it turns out chromosomally you're male, okay. So compete against girls. You didn't transition. You always thought you were a girl. Everyone thought you were a girl. Maybe it turns out they were wrong. At least that they thought you were female. You're still a girl. That's what you consider yourself to be. Fine. I'm okay with that. Maybe not for Olympic sports, not for professional sports, but for high school sports, yes. And obviously, nothing's etched in stone. We can always change the rules. We have to. I think I was going to play this clip from Emma Vigeland, but it's so absurd where she's like, I don't give a crap. She doesn't use crap. She uses the S word. I don't care if it ruins competition. I don't care if it's not fair. It's more important that we let transgender people be part of society. And you know what? They're part of society. No one's saying they're not. It's just a question of whether trans girls compete against girls in high school sports. That's it. Not saying you can't be in a high school play. Not saying you can't go to classes with everyone else or go to the prom or do everything else you can do. But the one thing you can't do is compete against girls if your birth certificate says you're a boy. unless the Birch review was clearly wrong and there's some issue there, as Shade points out, which is possible. It seems perfectly appropriate. And I don't see a good argument to the contrary. I would love to have an argument to the contrary. I think we need to have back and forth discussions. I can't stand it when their refusal to have a dialogue. And that brought me to this story. I found out, and by the way, I was going to talk a little bit about the allegations of anti-Semitism that have been lodged against a Jewish couple, a Zionist couple in California, the Resnicks, they're using an awful lot of water. And some are saying criticism of them is tantamount to anti-Semitism. I wanted to talk about that story, but you know what? We're almost at the hour, so I'm going to just probably end after this one. I'll talk about the Resnicks tomorrow on the Free-for-All and other stories as well. So I, months ago, commented on this Reddit sub-thread called Enough Sanders Spam. I didn't even remember doing that. It totally slipped my mind. I comment all the time in lots of different social media posts. But, and I called myself Hal Ginsberg, now I'm Halitics, but, I forgot. So I commented, and I forgot all about it. And then I looked at, I was on Reddit for some other reason, because I'm in other groups there. I'm in a ThinkPad users for my computer, and on my Fedora Linux users, and this and that, my techie stuff. So I looked at, I had these old messages in there, and I looked, and I realized I'd gotten a notice from Enough Sanders Spam, which I'd even forgotten I ever posted on. And so they said, you have been permanently banned. How lovely, from participating in Enough Sanders Spam. And this is very much like what happened to me on Daily Kos. They banned me because I guess I was too critical of they believe in Daily Kos, even though it's called Daily Kos. At least I'll give you this. Enough Sanders Spam, there's truth in advertising. They don't want to hear anything critical that might come, critical of the Dems. They don't want to hear any criticism from the left, which is what they call Sanders Spam. But Daily Kos just call themselves Daily Kos, but what they are is an appendage of the Democratic Party, and you can't criticize Democrats. And you can't criticize them from the left, and you can't call for voting for third parties, or alternative parties, can't do any of that on Daily Kos, and they'll ban you, as they did. They banned me from Daily Kos. So I've also been banned from Enough Sanders Spam. You won't be able to post or comment, but look how nice they are. But you can still view and subscribe to it. And I'm like, no, I don't play that game. I don't view and subscribe to channels that I don't get to. Well, I might view it because I make fun of them, mock them, but I'm about a dialogue, a discussion. I'm not about getting to drink in your wisdom, but you don't even know that I disagree with you. No, I'm not about that. And then they tell, here's an example of your comment. Well, it is my only comment, so I wouldn't say it's an example. It is my comment. And I think what I was responding to, I don't have the thread I was responding, but I think it was something about how Hillary was just a normal politician and it wasn't fair, and all the criticism she got, just for behaving just like everyone else, and what a phony Bernie is, and this and that, forever criticizing her. So this is what I wrote in response. They sure didn't like this, obviously, because I got banned. I mean, I think I was banned, right before I clicked submit. So I wrote, it's true that Hillary's actions, including fomenting a fascist coup in Honduras, which, by the way, is a significant driver of the immigration crisis, stymieing a minimum wage hike in Haiti for corporate benefactors. We've talked about that many times, turning Libya into a failed state. Of course, we know she did that, supporting Wall Street, reforms of Wall Street, standing foursquare against Medicare for all, touring the globe for fracking, and creating a phony narrative around a non-existent conspiracy to justify her loss to Trump. Those are normal. I don't disagree. You have a fair point there, I suppose. But that doesn't make it okay. That doesn't mean it's not corrupt. Well, they didn't like that. They said, you're gone. You're out for that. They didn't respond. They didn't say, well, here's why you're being unfair to her. Here's why that's spam. No, we don't want to hear it. We don't want a dialogue. We don't want a conversation. And what is the direct result of that attitude? A Trump presidency. A party that is completely unwilling to hear criticism, that is unwilling to change, that is unwilling to recognize its failings. And because of that, we have Trump as president. I saw this, so I was like, okay, I'll answer. I'll ask a question. So Reddit was very, very nice, the subreddit. I don't think this was the subreddit. I think this was Reddit. Reddit says, when, I think they tell their groups, if you create a group, I could create a subreddit, right? Anyone can create one. Oh, by the way, speaking of groups, if you haven't yet, subscribe to Halitics on Facebook. And I just saw we bumped up to 140. Woohoo! 140. I was glad to see that. And again, don't forget to click subscribe, click like on this particular video here on YouTube. By the way, if anyone called me, someone did call me. I'm so sorry. I missed your call. Call back if you can. I missed your call. I think that was Ari. Ari, I do apologize. I forgot to check my ringer and I missed you. So there it is ringing now. But if you call back in the next 5 minutes, Ari, I will talk to you if that was you or whoever it was. Reddit saying, if you have a question regarding your ban, you can contact the moderator team by replying to this message. So I thought, all right, well, I have a question about my ban, so I'll ask it. And so here was my question, which I think was a very fair question. I like the question I asked. Since they banned me, I made an assumption. What did I write that you consider unfair or inaccurate, right? I mean, if you're going to ban me, you must have thought I said something that was wrong-headed, misguided, untrue, unfair. So what was it? That's all I want to know. Let's have a dialogue. Even though you say we're not going to have a dialogue, if you disagree with me, tell me what I said wrong. So they didn't like that either. And I got this response from the subreddit. You have been temporarily muted. Isn't that hilarious? First they say, if you don't like your ban, you can question it. You can contact the moderators. And so they didn't like my question. So now I can't even message them for 28 days. Well, I don't think I'll waste any more time. But again, this is emblematic of the failing of the Democratic establishment, and for all I know, these are just your average, everyday Dems. And they can't bear to have their, preconceptions, their received notions challenged, questioned. They can't bear it. So they just won't even have a dialogue. And I see that over and over from the centrist Dems, the corporate Dems. Rather than discuss, rather than being open to criticism, they don't want to hear it. They won't hear it. And it's very, very unfortunate. And that's perfect example of why Republicans win. Because the party is top down, because the party makes decisions, the party makes excuses, explanations, apologia, but never comes clean, never acknowledges real error. When I say apology, I don't mean they apologize. I mean they say, well, Harris couldn't really break with Biden. She couldn't really do that. Not, she was wrong and she should have broken with Biden and she did, and that's why she lost. Well, she was between a rock and a hard place. She didn't have enough time to campaign. That's the failure of the Democratic Party. Complete inability, unwillingness to question itself, to examine itself, and you know why? We're going to leave it at this. Because it's corrupt. Because its failings are the direct result of its being owned by the billionaire elites. And that forces it over and over to betray the people that the party claims to represent. Can't admit that, right? Can't acknowledge that. You can't say that. Well, the problem is we take all this money from billionaires, from warmongers, from big banks, from importers, from short-timers, from gamblers. We can't admit that because then we would really have to change. And we like it. We like things just the way they are, even if we're going to lose a few elections. In the end, we, the Democratic elites, get to live a lot better than you.